In early 2013, 8 long years after the release of Sly 3, Sly fans finally got what they'd been asking for so long. A 4th game in the Sly Cooper franchise, and now, 8 weeks after my Sly 3 review, I'm ready to tackle that very game. So join me in today's episode when I look at Sly Cooper, Thieves in Time on the PS3 and the PlayStation Vita. With a whole new set of developers, a whole new console generation and a handheld to play it on, and potentially a whole new generation of fans that are playing the game as well, did Sanzaru capture the magic of Sly Cooper, or did they fall short? Let's find out in today's video. 8 long years after the events of Sly 3, we pick right back up where we left off, with Sly still feigning amnesia, Bentley and Penelope still working on a time machine, and Murray causing havoc as a champion demolition derby driver. Penelope has recently disappeared, however, and while searching for her, Bentley discovers that the writings in the Thieves Raccoonus are bit by bit vanishing. Somebody had clearly beaten him to the punch and developed their own time machine, and clearly that was somebody with far more sinister intentions. Bentley decides it's finally time to get the gang back together, and repurposes Murray's van back to the future style. The one thing the gang needed to time travel was an artifact from the era to which they were traveling, in this case a samurai sword from feudal Japan. So by now you know the drill. The gang steals the sword from the museum in Paris and escapes. Well, not before Carmelita finds Sly and, brokenhearted that he'd lied to her for a decade, tries to zap him into the next century with her trusty shock pistol. From there, the gang travels through 5 different eras, freeing Sly's ancestors and even working with them to correct the course of history. Each time period has its own big bad from the present, all of whom report to a mastermind that we'll talk about later. No matter who's running the show though, it's clear that each one has a specific focus, destroying the Cooper family history. The villains in Sly 4 are okay. I'd probably as a whole put them as the weakest in the series. None of them ever pose a huge threat in my eyes, and in a few cases they feel redundant. El Jefe feels like a weaker combination of Rajan from Sly 2 and General Tsao from 3. The Black Knight and the Black Baron are both mysterious figures with a strong grasp on technology. The Grizz is for most of his level just a Diet Dimitri, and Ms. Decibel is just one of Rajan's elephants. Okay, jokes aside, why are some elephants fully sentient and others just regular animals in this universe? Every villain in Sly 4 in some way represents an homage to the original trilogy, and while I respect that, it weakens each of them when I get a feeling of been there, done that. That's not a lasting issue though, as the weaker villains are made up in a couple ways. First off, a more minor addition, the guards in this game have a ton of personality. They're often caught talking in cutscenes, and their dialogue can be hilarious. Much more notably, you'll probably forget about the boss issues due to the newest, or I guess oldest, members of the gang, Sly's ancestors. In each episode, the gang rescues that era's ancestor, and after that, they become fully playable characters with their own missions, dialogue, and most importantly, personalities. Seeing some of these Coopers that we've built up over the course of Sly 1 and 3, such as Ryoichi or the Wild West Bandit Tennessee Kid, in the flesh is an amazing creative decision that blows the gang of Sly 3 out of the water. The main Cooper trio teaming up with one of Sly's ancestors in each episode, with Carmelita later joining the gang as well, albeit hesitantly, makes for a fantastic spin on the group dynamic that helps cut out any concerns about the gang starting to get stale. Not to mention, it's great to see these ancestors interacting with the gang, and hear Bentley try to explain modern technology to them. On that note, it's time for the spoiler warning. Skip to this point in the video if you'd like to avoid spoilers for Thieves in Time. By the game's 4th episode, with Carmelita and Sly at least somewhat reunited, Bentley's really missing Penelope. Yeah, remember how I mentioned Penelope once and then forgot about her for a little while? So did Sly 4. Oops. After working to learn more about the Black Knight, Bentley eventually trails him into one of his facilities, where the night suit opens up to reveal... Penelope. She had betrayed Bentley and joined Le Paradox in wiping out the Cooper line because she had grown tired of Bentley's moral compass interfering with their combined intellect. As arguably the 2 smartest people on Earth, they could have made a killing if Bentley wasn't, in her eyes, infected by Sly's do-good attitude. By removing Sly and thus his influence from the equation entirely, she and Bentley could rule the world. This is the most controversial part of the entire game, and ruined Thieves in Time for many a Sly fan. However, if you really think about it, her logic isn't totally flawed. It skips over some very important context, like how Paradox is absolutely going to double-cross her at some point, but after 8 years of living together between Sly's 3 and 4, and 8 years of Bentley sticking to the good side of the fight even after everybody else had moved on, I can sort of see how Penelope snapped. That said, it's still an awful plot point because of how poorly it's set up and revealed. After being mentioned no more than a tiny handful of times before episode 4, her name's thrown back in your face early and often right before the reveal, which makes it feel both out of nowhere and rushed. Anyway, you're probably wondering who that Paradox I mentioned a moment ago is. This little skunk is teased throughout the game, but barely seen until near the end. It's only after he's retrieved all of Sly's ancestors' canes, or at least the 5 we saw, kidnapping Carmelita, and a trip to the present that we find out his motivation. It turns out that Paradox was also from a long line of thieves, albeit not very good ones since you could smell them coming a mile away. Paradox's father had planned to frame Sly's father for stealing the largest diamond in the world. However, the old Cooper gang already had their eye on that diamond and beat him to the punch, leaving Daddy Paradox to get locked up. Paradox vowed revenge on the entire Cooper family and planned to wipe their name from history. Sly, as recklessly as always, ran ahead to free Carmelita, knowing he was running right into a trap. Hey, deja vu. Bentley this time didn't need his hacking skills to save Sly though, as he had gone back and brought all 5 Cooper ancestors with him to retrieve their canes. After doing so and restoring the correct flow of time, the gang saved Sly and Carmelita from that trap. Paradox, because he's bad at everything, then accidentally smashes the time machine and opens up a rip in space-time, setting the stage for a final battle with Sly as the rest of the gang escaped. And oh god, this is awful. The final battle of this game is a QuickTime event. I know Sly games have always struggled with final boss battles, but this is by far the worst. After this very weak final boss fight, Paradox tricks Sly into saving him, steals his paraglider, and then escapes to get hit by a plane for whatever reason, leaving Sly to get warped out of the present with no way of his friends finding him. For months after this, Bentley, Murray, and Carmelita continued to search wherever and whenever they could, but they turned nothing up. Sly was just gone. If you get the game's Platinum trophy, you'll find in a little post-credits scene that Sly is stuck in ancient Egypt, a tease for the Sly 5 that, as of right now, we've never gotten. I'll admit, I went into this review pretty skeptical, because I remember having many issues during my first playthrough 5 years ago, but I came out pleasantly surprised. I think Thieves in Time's plot holds up much better than Sly 3's did for me. It doesn't come close to Band of Thieves in terms of writing, but despite some missteps, I really enjoyed this game's story. I'll touch on this more in a little bit, but it felt like this was a labor of love. The dialogue is funny, with references all over the place both to previous games and just pop culture in general. Despite being stuck with the time travel gimmick thanks to Sucker Punch's tease ending to the 3rd game, Sanzaru mostly nailed a time-based story. The only real paradox is in the villain's name. As a result though, the plot stumblings are entirely on Sanzaru. I can't give them a pass for the stuff I mentioned in the spoiler section. Plus, there's a whole subplot about Murray feeling unimportant within the gang that's just a total retread of previous games. Despite knocking a rough gimmick out of the park, they somehow tripped on the way to home base. I still enjoyed what we got, and I appreciate a lot of the moment-to-moment storytelling more than the overall plot lets on, but I can't give the story anything more than a silver bolt. I'm happy to say that despite those narrative stumblings, Thieves in Time mechanically is an absolute return to form for the series. And I don't just mean that they picked up where Sly 3 left off. Oh, no, they did one better. They picked up where Sly 2 left off. This means that clue bottles are back, treasure is back, the open worlds mean something again, and they topped that too by modernizing those open worlds with the addition of a mini-map radar and a full map that you can open at any time by pressing the select button. This is something I didn't know I wanted until I was replaying Sly 2 and 3 for their respective reviews. Even as great as Sly 2's world design is with all the set pieces and landmarks, I couldn't help but feel sometimes that a map would help when searching for those missing clue bottles or treasures. But they didn't stop at just fixing up Sly 2. The costumes from Sly 3 return and now serve a functional gameplay purpose. Each one has a distinct gimmick that alters Sly's moveset, from the fireproof samurai armor to firing arrows with a Robin Hood costume. And these, wait for it, tie into those treasures. Each world has a dozen treasures for you to obtain, with 5 of those set aside for the 5 costumes. Some of them even require you to swap between different costumes, and these especially are a load of fun. All of this makes for some great backtracking moments if you choose to go for all the treasures, and it really helps the worlds feel more whole. But wait, I'm gonna blow your mind. You don't have to enter the safe house anymore to deposit treasure. Thank you! That means that you can grab these treasures mid-mission if you'd like, there's nothing stopping you. This was one of my bigger gripes with Sly 2, and I'm happy to say that Sanzaru thought ahead on this one. These treasures aren't worth nearly as much here. The most valuable one in Sly 4 would fit snugly into the 3rd episode in Sly 2. That's okay though, because Sanzaru heard us again. The loot that you pickpocket in Sly 4 has a set value, and that value is actually substantial here, unlike in Sly 3. Again, thank you! Like always, every world has 3 different types of loot, but here they're consistently worth 100, 200, or 500 coins. So they've addressed some of my biggest issues with both Sly 2 and 3 now, both related to the game's economy. So how does the economy hold up in 4 with these changes? Unsurprisingly, incredibly well. After every single job in this game, you're guaranteed to find some new abilities in ThiefNet. These abilities you can buy naturally scale up in cost over time, but are always pretty reasonably priced. There is a bit of a trade-off. Like in Sly 3, many of Thieves and Time's abilities are iterative upgrades to previous powers, but unlike both Sly 2 and Sly 3, many abilities of old are mysteriously absent here. The combat dodge, and even a series staple like the knockout dive, are gone, which leads me to fight far fewer enemies head-on when I'm playing as Sly. While I do love this from a logical standpoint, Sly was never meant to be a powerhouse in combat after all, it does leave me missing those cut abilities. It feels a bit too uniform now that instead of having a gadget grid with multiple different powers, Sly is limited to just his costumes. And Bentley, Murray, and even Carmelita are each limited to 4 cookie-cutter variants to their standard attacks. Giving Murray explosive or electrically charged punches is neat, but it doesn't make up for losing the ability to incinerate enemies instantly with a punch. There are at least a whole new slew of more passive abilities, such as Bentley being able to kick bombs around, Sly having a dive attack when paragliding, and Murray's elbow drops having a shockwave upgrade.
Oh yeah!
Even the clue bottle rewards are more passive affairs here, with powers that increase the pickup range of coins, a bottle radar, or even one that cuts the damage you take in half. Sanzaru had a clear fondness for more passive abilities, and it works just fine, it just leaves me wanting a bit. Now with all that said, how does the core gameplay feel? It's a new team and a new system. Did they get the feel of Sly Cooper right? Yeah, they did. Sly, Bentley, and Murray feel almost identical to their PS2 counterparts, which makes sense since Sanzaru ported the trilogy over before being greenlit to make Thieves in Time. Hell, even Carmelita more or less feels identical to her Sly 3 gameplay, just with slightly remapped controls and arbitrarily having her super jump locked until a late game purchase. They didn't have to relearn anything because the HD collection was their warm-up. So what about those ancestors? How do they feel to play? Well, in a pretty genius move, Sanzaru avoided the same pitfall that Sly 3 fell into by adding variety without adding new gameplay styles. The ancestors play like Sly without his power-ups, but with new abilities of their own. Ryuichi has a much longer ninja spire jump, Salim Al-Kupar can speed up vertical climbs, and Tennessee Kid just has a friggin' gun. Actually, in one of my favorite references in recent gaming history, Tennessee even has a dead shot as if he's straight out of Red Dead Redemption. Additionally, each ancestor has some unique charge and stealth takedown attacks, which are nothing more than window dressing, but it goes a long way to make them feel more unique. The 2 ancestors whose abilities I have a bit of an issue with are Sir Galith and Sly's first ancestor, the proto-raccoon Bob. Galith's ability is a much stronger wall hook jump that crashes through any objects above him. Only in Galith's world does Sly get less air on his wall hook jumps though, so it almost feels like they intentionally weaken Sly in just this level. Likewise, Bob can climb up ice walls, because for some reason Sly can't do that anymore like he could in 2. These 2 both utilize abilities that Sly has in a way that he couldn't anyway, don't get me wrong. It just feels a bit weird to see his moveset get ignored or actively weakened just to highlight another Cooper. It's a minor thing in the bigger picture though, and each ancestor is used incredibly well despite this one nitpick. With all of that out of the way, there are only a few things left for me to touch on: the mission design and the overworld, and these two actually go hand in hand here. Let's touch on the latter first. With the jump to the PS3, the team had the opportunity to ramp up beyond the smaller, more contained worlds from the previous games, and boy did they do just that. It can be a genuine challenge to find the clue bottles now, because these worlds get pretty huge by Sly standards. To help pack in the worlds a bit more, there are also 60 collectible Sly masks hidden throughout the game. These can be spread throughout the overworlds, but also in the mission-specific areas, and for every 5 or 10 you unlock, you'll also unlock some little goodies that I'll cover a little bit later. However, I can't help but feel the worlds still do end up being a bit on the empty side. It suffers from a much different problem than Sly 3, and that ties into the mission design. See, Thieves in Time loves its interiors. The majority of the game's missions take place inside rather than out in the overworlds. This is actually a very welcome change of pace for me, because it allows the game to veer back into being a platformer just as it veered back into being more of a stealth game. It's a superb mixture of all three of the previous Sly games, and it's something I didn't know I wanted. So many of these interiors actually bring me back to the Sly 1 days of linear level design, where missions highlighted the mechanics in unique ways rather than highlighting the worlds in unique ways. Although in an odd omission, the barrel levels are totally gone now. Yet again, Sanzaru brought back and combined aspects of all three PS2 Sly games, but also made some questionable cuts. Either way, these interiors help the missions feel incredibly different in each world, almost to a fault. I will say that I don't feel as satisfied with the heists in Sly 4 because the game is so focused on individual missions that the overarching episode goal gets a bit lost. When it comes to those individual missions though, one of the things I love most about Thieves in Time is that it solved Sly 3's problems with character representation. In this game, missions are longer than they've ever been before, and in nearly every mission you'll take control of multiple members of the gang working in tandem. Very rarely in Sly 4 did I feel that somebody was cut back just to highlight someone else. Carmelita's a bit underused in Arabia if I want to nitpick, but that's about it really. Bentley's RC car and chopper also make somewhat limited returns, with hacking taking a much more substantial role here. This allows Bentley to sit back in the safe house, letting other members contribute more to the physical jobs while keeping the turtle relevant. In Sly 4, there are 3 different types of hacking minigames: an updated version of the tank minigame that we all know and love, a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up, and the most questionable, ball mazes that are exclusively controlled by the DualShock 3's 6-axis gyroscope. This game came out in 2013. Ratchet & Clank Future Tools of Destruction came out in 2007 with a similar 6-axis minigame, but even back then there was the foresight to turn that crap off. This came out the same year as The Last of Us and is still using launch-era PS3 gimmicks. It's just strange. At the very least, they're not too intrusive, but if your gyroscope doesn't work, or doesn't work well, you probably can't get too far in Sly 4. Anyway, to get back to the topic of mission variety, while the longer missions can get a bit too long every now and then, I rarely noticed because usually I was having a blast. Sly 4 is just fun, and having dedicated mission areas that aren't just in the overworld goes a huge way towards making it so fun. But again, it's a give and take, because these interiors simultaneously hurt the overworld. For as empty as the worlds were in Sly 3, at least the game used them most of the time for missions. In Sly 4, there are so many jobs that start you in the overworld, only to have you walk 30 feet and enter a specialized area for the rest of that job. And this is where I get to talk about the worst part of this entire game. Sly 4's loading screens, I'm not exaggerating one bit, are some of the worst that have ever existed on the PS3. It's a good thing you don't have to enter the safe house when depositing treasure, because you'd be waiting, no joke, a full minute one way. That's 2 minutes of loading every time you change characters. That's a minute of loading every time you enter an interior. That's 15 to 30 seconds of loading just to load a Bentley hacking mission. As far as I can tell, the game makes no attempt whatsoever to load in the background, so when you're watching that cutscene and then have to walk 20 feet to enter that building, yeah, another minute. When your game has worse loading times than Sonic 06, you've got a problem. While we're talking about Sonic 06 issues, the loading screens, and frame rate for that matter, are even worse on the Vita version of Sly 4. I understand it running at 30 frames per second on handheld, that's fine enough, but it's not a stable 30. Even on PS3, the frame rate isn't even close to a stable 60 FPS. It's bad. The overworlds just seem to be too big for this engine to handle. Going bigger and simultaneously using these overworlds less was a very questionable choice. If you can get past the lower resolution and frame rate though, Sly 4 on Vita is a viable option, if only barely. I'd recommend the PS3 version over it any day, but there are some neat bonuses to playing it on the go, including this AR mode that lets the Vita be a second screen for the PS3 version of the game, highlighting the collectibles you've missed so that you can more easily find them. Also, fair warning, the trophy lists are separate on PS3 and Vita, meaning that if you transfer your save file from one platform to another, and you have the platinum like I did, oops. For all of its issues, I would still actually go as far to say that Thieves in Time is a near-perfect mixture of all three Sly games that came before it. But perfectly combining three games that were often at odds with one another doesn't lead to a perfect game, it leads to a bit of a perfect mess. For all of its leaps ahead, Sly 4 does, again, trip quite a bit, so it'll get a silver bolt for its gameplay too. I'll be honest, I used to hate the way that Sly 4 looked. Something about the models just seemed off. I'm not sure what I was thinking though, as looking at it now, it feels like the logical next-gen leap for the series. Obviously the frame rate sometimes hurts that, but Sly, Bentley, and Murray look spot on, with Carmelita looking... okay, they kinda went a bit overboard with Carmelita, and it's making me a little bit uncomfortable. Okay, you know what? I stand corrected. The locales in Sly 4, while they occasionally feel a bit redundant with respect to the rest of the series, are all beautiful in their own right, and more importantly, they feel accurate to the time periods in which they're set. Well, except for the dinosaurs in the Ice Age level, that's not even close. Something else I find super neat is that with the exception of the returning cartoon-styled animations and the final boss fight itself, every cutscene in Sly 4 takes place in real time. If you have the Fists of Flame equipped, Murray's fists will be on fire during cutscenes. This is also true for all of the collectible mask bonuses I mentioned earlier. Each of our 4 present-day heroes has an alternate costume unlocked via those Sly masks. Murray's got a wetsuit, Bentley's RoboCop, Carmelita is Catwoman, which is fitting since her 4th new voice actor plays Catwoman in the Arkham games, and Sly's got a skin very similar to the Caped Crusader himself. There's something fitting about sitting on a perch and taking down baddies as Bat Cooper under the cover of night.
Where's Batman?
Sly in particular even has 2 cosmetic paraglider skins, as well as 2 Kane skins that have different effects. The first of these is Cole McGrath's amp weapon from Infamous, Sucker Punch's follow-up to Sly, which will add shock damage and a stun effect to any enemies you hit. And second is Ratchet's wrench, which turns all coins in the game into bolts and doubles the coin value. You get both of these a bit too late in the game to need either of them, but hey, it's still neat. Sanzaru packed in a bunch of these sorts of little references too, with Clank and Daxter hidden in the game as treasures, and Clockwork is even hiding in each of the game's worlds, stalking the Cooper ancestors throughout history just as he said he'd done in Sly 1. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that Carmelita has a new voice actor, again, and she's personally my favorite of the 4 she's had. It's not just her though, every character in Thieves in Time sounds absolutely elated to be there. You can tell just how much the voice crew loved and missed the Cooper gang. With all of Sly's jokes and everybody's banter, there's something to be said about how quickly Sly 4 picks right back up where 3 left off. Even after nearly a decade, nobody missed a beat, and arguably every performance here is stronger than ever. They even brought back Sly's terrible Italian accent. That's dedication. Now, given, the characters might talk a little bit too much when walking around during missions, but I don't really mind that. I wish their mouths moved in-game like they do during cutscenes more than anything. One specific battle has a lot of talking and absolutely zero lip-syncing, it's just distracting. That aside though, there are so many little quirks that show how much Sanzaru truly wanted to make Thieves in Time. For one, they brought back Peter McConnell, the composer from Sly 2 and 3, and he does a great job sliding right back into the role. Sly 4's soundtrack catches right up to, and at many times surpasses, the previous games. Rather than just incorporating that one signature Sly flourish to all of the songs, McConnell sneaks in different sections of the main Sly theme in order to spice it up. Perhaps the instrument choice gets a bit too overzealous during certain tracks, but the overworld themes especially are as strong as ever. Sanzaru really did go above and beyond with little touches. Murray's got a little guru keychain hiding in his binocucom. The treasures are very often callbacks to previous games or to pop culture in general. When you jump into a pit or into water, the game actually rewinds time to reset you back to where you were. They even went as far as to give Sly alternate HUD icons whenever he changes into a different costume. It's something nobody would have missed if it wasn't here, but they wanted to go that extra step. Now, obviously, I probably would have preferred if they'd spent that time optimizing the game a bit more, because again, ooh, that frame rate. It's very hard to appreciate Sly 4 as much as I would like to when I'm sitting there in silence during a loading screen or when the game runs like total trash. It's unprecedented that I would mention something like the frame rate negatively affecting two different categories in a review, but the frame rate and the loading times here are genuinely that bad that they hurt the game twice. So with that in mind, let's make it a threefer. Sly 4 will again receive a silver bolt, this time for its presentation. Let me tell you, I certainly didn't expect this video to go nearly 30 minutes. I thought, if anything, that the Sly 4 review would be the shortest game in the marathon. But as I was writing the script for this video, it all sort of came together in my head. I saw the pieces of Sly 1, 2, and 3 come together in Thieves in Time, and it made for a much more impactful experience than I was expecting. With all that said, I can't help but feel there is one very big thing missing from Sly 4, but I can't put my finger on it. Wait, I know. I want to throw a special thanks to the band Consinity for contacting me and offering me use of some of their songs. This cover you're hearing right now of E.T. ended up making for some of my favorite gags that I've done so far, and it's a great cover to boot. If you want to hear more of their stuff, there'll be a link down in the description. Also, quick shout out to my buddy Trav for at the last minute working up that Sly Batman joke. Trav also has a channel where he reviews games, and his videos are pretty good if I do say so myself, so make sure to give him a look too.